Hi everyone, welcome back. It's just a brief visit to the allotment this morning. I've got some decorating to do at home. I've got my orders, so I can't hang around too long. But I just thought I'd show you the fruit today and at what stage it's at. Okay, catch you in a minute. Well, it's a lovely morning today. It's still fairly quiet. It's about 7:15 now, and no one's around. So we'll have a look at the fruit. I've mentioned already in recent updates that we took a fence out just here at the top of these three beds. This is where we had a run of autumn raspberries, and they went from the bottom there right up round the back of the fruit cage. But the base of the fence was matted with couch grass and nettles, and it was a constant battle trying to stay on top of the area. Not only that, but the autumn raspberries, as is their manner, were kind of spreading sideways, both into the beds on this side and on the other side. And you also saw in the last update that I had to remove quite a few of them. And there are still a few on the bed at the other side of the path. So they were taken out. But what we did was we chose probably the best 20 plants or so, and we moved them down here to the bottom, just at the other side of those two smaller raised beds there. Now that area used to have summer raspberries, but they were a little bit dry and not very predictable, not very tasty either for that matter. They were quite an old plant. So we grubbed those out and we transplanted these autumn raspberries, because we've plenty enough raspberries. We'll look at these two little areas in a little bit more detail, because it's interesting to see how they're different in size. The established plants, as you can see, there's a run of about 10 metres, I would say, going up the side there and then just back over to the right towards the compost bin. And these are about, I would say, 2 feet in height and quite bushy, because there'll be several plants or clumps of plants growing up. They do tend to grow up the other side of the fence as well, and passerbys do enjoy pinching them, but we don't mind, makes everybody happy. So they look nice and lush, bushy, 2 feet high. Now the other plants that were up the middle there that we took out and transplanted, they were transplanted in about the middle of winter. And as you can see, these are much smaller, aren't they? The small clumps with maybe 2 or 3 shoots coming out of each one, and the foliage is probably between about 4 inch in height and about 10 inch in height. And I just thought I'd show you, it's no big thing, but we transplanted these in the middle of winter, and this just gives you an idea of how long it takes them to catch up. They still come, so even if you transplant them in December or January, they'll still bounce back, but they're probably, I'd say, 3 to 4 weeks behind the established plants. We will still get plenty of fruit, I would imagine, and it's also the case, and I think this is probably a common experience, that on the new growth you tend to get bigger and better raspberries. So just because you've transplanted them doesn't mean that you won't necessarily get anything in the way of fruit, because they might actually crop quite well. This is one of the blackcurrant bushes, and as you can see, we've had the blossom and the berries have formed already. This is an established plant, and it's just on the corner of the apple orchard, and you can see we're down at the bottom. If you look up, you can see all 4 plots in the distance. In front of us, this is where we've got the strawberry bed, and this needs to be weeded again. It's on the weeding list. Now, we were planning to put 3 nice large raised beds here, but the scaffolder that we get the planks from didn't have any available, so we were a little bit stumped really this year. So Ron actually cleared this bed out over winter and replanted the decent plants. So the plants here at the front, the first two and the far two, they're quite healthy, but the ones in the middle are tiny because they were small runners, so it'll take a while for those to become established again. But as I say, it needs to be weeded as well, and it also needs to be watered. We've put like a strawy manure in the furrows, but the tops are prone to drying out quite quickly. Just at the head of this bed there were 3 small plum trees, and these were cheap, you know, vastly reduced in price at the garden centre, so we just picked 3 up. I think they're about £89 each or something like that. Might have been £10 each. But they didn't have great shapes, and that's one of the problems with fruit trees. It's nice if you get a nice, you know, in this kind of setting, if you get a small dwarf rootstock or a bush variety that's got a nice hourglass shape, but as you can see some of these didn't, and as a result they were a little bit prone to the wind, a little bit exposed. And I think it might have been the winter before last, we had a really blustery couple of weeks, and we noticed that the trees were actually blowing over, and we were concerned that the root system might be damaged. So we put these large posts in, but you can still see how from the form of the trees, the shape of the trees, how they're kind of leaning this way a little bit. Well, 2 of the trees were okay, but clearly the tree in the middle, I think it was an old English gauge, quite a nice gauge it was, really super sweet. Not very prolific, not much fruit, but really tasty. But the roots on that one were clearly damaged, so and that tree is now dead by the looks of it, so that will have to come out. And in fairness, there probably was only room for 2 trees anyway, so that middle one will come out. Looking back in the other direction, and we've got 4 apple trees and 2 plum trees, and the apple trees are old varieties. There were varieties that were known to grow quite well up here in the north of England, and but they are, I forget the varieties. I may pop that up on the screen for you when I get home. But I think several of them are biannual. So if you're not really careful at thinning your fruit, you find that you get a heavy crop one year and very little the next. So, and like a lot of the old varieties, they are prone to disease as well. The 2 plum trees up at the top here were pruned quite heavily, because they're very vigorous, aren't they? Plum trees. This one particularly here on the left, this is Marjorie's seedling. It's a heavy cropper, but it doesn't half grow, so it had to have a good chop back. The one on the side there, it's got a really nice shape, not quite as vigorous in its growth. I think that one's called Laxton's Delicious, and that's a really sweet, perfumed plum on that one as well, but not very prolific again in terms of fruit, the amount that you get, but very, very tasty, and a large plum as well. Well, the goosegogs are doing well in their new fruit cage up at the top. I call it a fruit cage, but we're still waiting for sight fencing. We've got some on order. We're trying to get some with a neighbour and trying to get a better price by buying more, and then we'll share them. And these were planted here, I think, the winter before last, and you can see there's fruit formed on these already. All the plants look really nice and healthy. And this is I forget the name, but it's a red variety, but it's very sweet in a good year. And we've got 6 of these, I think, yeah, and 3 blackcurrant. But we need to repair this fence, because as you can see, the horse has leaned over the fence and nibbled away the tops of the blackcurrant just there. So this is not our fence, but it looks like we'll end up having to replace it. So with a bit of luck, we'll get this surrounded with more sight fencing and some netting, and all the gooseberries will be safe this year as well. Now we do have another fruit cage, and that one's well covered, and that's the one that was on the site initially. Didn't have anything in it. We filled it up with about a dozen plants, and I'll show you that now. And this is the original fruit cage. It's a nice structure, this one. It was the only thing of value really, along with some of the rhubarb, that was on this plot. And all of the plants now are quite established. There are 3 or 4 that are probably 5 or 6 years old. The others are about 3 or 4 year old, but they've all fleshed out nicely. This is an area that Ron weeded as well in the winter when I was a bit bogged down at home. He came down and he braved all the insects in there. And always gets badly bitten when he goes in, so he's not very keen. But as you can see, it's very, very densely packed with currants of every description, and this year looks like it's going to be a really bumper year. In front of us, I think that's a white currant, and you can see it's absolutely saturated, that's the best word for it, with strings of currants that are all forming. And you can see, I would say there's about a dozen plants in here, and I think that, judging by what I can see from here, probably 10 will be laden with fruit. And we've got white currant, I think 2 different varieties of white currant, probably about 7 or 8 red currants, and then I think there's 2 black currants as well. But it's quite a big fruit cage. It's probably about 15-16 foot wide and about 12 foot deep. And we, in recent years, in previous years, we've mulched this with hops, spent hops, but we've put about a foot of manure on this year. There are still a few weeds in it, so I need to get in and try and remove some of the bigger stuff, but I don't want to damage the plants and the fruit now. So that's often the way with fruit cages like this. You have a good clear out at the start of the season and then remove what you can, and then you have to leave it until the end of the season when you prune. But we should have no shortage of currants this year, I don't think. And here we are on the second plot, looking at the 6 fruit trees between the first and second allotments. The first 2 on the left are 2 young Victoria plum trees. This is only the 2nd year, so they've not borne any fruit yet. In the middle, straddling the path, are 2 Nashi pear trees, and these came into blossom really early. They actually come into blossom before the plum and the gage, but that does make them vulnerable to damage by the frost. I've watered all the trees a couple of times, and quite heavily, because it's been so dry. And these 2 came into blossom, but then the blossom faded away, but all the fruits sat beneath the blossom. On the right one there, they were all burned, they were all black. So we must have had a nasty frost, maybe one night during the hot weather. So it's unlikely that we'll get any fruit from that one, but there's a chance we may get a few Nashi pears on the one on the left. The 2 trees just set down on this plot, just at the other side of the greenhouse, they're a Granny Smith and a Braeburn apple, and they are about 4 years old now. And although they're only small trees, they do crop quite nicely, and the fruits are nice and clean as well, quite substantial, quite large. So they are the 6 fruit trees on the no-dig border between the first and second plots. Sat on the bench, taking it easy now, just outside the main working greenhouse, and we're looking at the good old rhubarb. And I've talked about this a lot in the past, and I had the good fortune to see Ronald Shaw, who has his own YouTube channel, Ronald Shaw's car park garden, and I was passing, and so I took him some comfrey plants. But when I saw him, he said, "Oh, I'm surprised you're as tall as you are. I thought you were quite small, probably about 5'8" or something like that." And actually I'm 6'1". And I'm guessing that the reason he thought I was so small is because he saw me picking the rhubarb and I was overshadowed by the rhubarb. So maybe not, but anyway. But it is quite a nice clump, this. Terry King, the robotic gardener, he's got a nice patch of rhubarb as well, but his is in a raised bed, I think, a long oblong raised bed, and he's probably got about the same volume. But this, I noticed the other day, I looked on Google Earth, and it's the first time I've ever done it, and And I thought, oh, like you do, just out of curiosity, I'll look at, you know, where we live and what it looks like from high up. And then I thought, oh, well, just scroll down a little bit and look at the allotment sites. And as I zoomed in, the first thing I saw was the rhubarb. So it stood out quite nicely. And it's quite interesting if you look at the pictures from Google Earth, you can get an idea of the shape of our allotment. And you'll see that it's a little bit of an island, really. This site is mixed paddock and allotment, and most of it's actually paddocks. I don't know how large the site is, but it might be about 6 or 8 acres or something like that. And there are about 20-25 allotments, and they generally run around the outside of the site. And there are 2 lanes running from north to south through the middle of the site, and I'm based on the left of those 2 lanes. And you can see that it's L-shaped, my plot, the 4 allotments. But there's not really very much in the way of allotments around me, just paddocks and horses. We do have an allotment opposite us now, and you can see. This was actually funded by the local authority, by the town council, I think, as a community garden. The idea being that people might come down, maybe schools, things like, you know, people like that, just to have a look around the site, look at the chickens and how things are grown. So that's developed quite quickly, and actually it looks quite good. They're making a good job of it, but that's the only thing opposite us. All the rest of the area around us is all paddocks. So I know another YouTuber once said, oh, we don't see much of the allotments on your site, Mike. Well, that's because there aren't many, and I've got the privileged position of being right in the middle of the site, with no major trees or anything around me. Good light all the way around. Slopes from north to south a little bit, facing the sun as it passes overhead during the day. And yeah, we're very lucky. So it's quite green. If you look in this direction, you can see there's been some development, residential development, and there's a residential care home in front there. But if you look the other way, you can't see from this position, but it's very green. So that's my rhubarb, or I should say our rhubarb, because Ron is using quite a lot of it as well. Anyway, that was a quick look at the fruit on the plot. You can see the raspberries in the distance there. There are a couple of fruit trees up here as well that were neglected and weren't pruned last year. As you can see, the water shoots on the top of the apple tree there, and a bit of erratic growth on the cherry at that side. But they'll be attended to in this coming autumn and winter. So that's it for this update. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I've noticed a bit of a surge in subscribers in the last few weeks. I'm very grateful. And I hope to see you again soon. Okay, catch you later.